Let's back up. Right, hello everybody again, welcome back. This is day 5 of Ethics of Sources. Now, as always, I'm going to just turn off my camera because it destroys my bandwidth. So I say that every day, I know, but... Okay, so what is day 5 about? Well, today I'm going to be showing you a little bit about, I suppose, my working methods, the way that I work, which is what I've been doing all week. But this is more about what I'm kind of doing these days. So basically what I do now is all about finding and exploiting hardware and operating system flaws, and an introduction to circuit bent webcams, the theory and application of that, and what I do to get sources going through the webcams, like pointing them at CRTs or using them live in processing. So as this is one of my main areas of research, I'm maybe going to spend a bit more time doing that and illustrating those points. Now, the reason I first got into making glitch art was I was experimenting with converting cheap digital cameras to near infrared, which is actually quite easy to do. And I was still painting in those days, and I was looking for new ways to look at landscape and portrait, just different color values. And so I just built up this big collection of cheap digital cameras. So while I was actually converting one of them, I downloaded the images from it onto my laptop, and I noticed that some of them were really mangled, and they're in this really strange format as well called PPM, and it looked like this. So that is literally the very, very first glitch that I ever made. And from there, I kind of looked at this, and there's a couple of images like that on the camera. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I kind of started researching it. And then I started to discover circuit bending. And a friend of mine who's, she's a designer, and she pointed me in the direction of this guy, Philip Stearns, who was doing something at the time called the Year of the Glitch. And so in the Year of the Glitch, which was around 2012, basically Philip Stearns was taking old Kodak cameras, taking them apart, rewiring them, then recording the output of that onto DVD, and then reusing that in his art. And then from there, just because I was researching even more into circuit bending, I discovered a guy called Reed Ghazala. Now, Reed Ghazala is considered to be the father of circuit bending. And his website is really interesting because he goes into the theory of circuit bending, safe methods of doing it. I'm not going to go into the safe methods of doing circuit bending because that's not really within the scope of what I want to do, but all the instructions that he uses are very spot on. And so through discovering those two people and also kind of having this big collection of old cameras, I started to modify my own cameras. Yeah, basically don't be connected to a power outlet. Yeah, that's very true. But as I say, I mean, if people want to research it, go to the anti-theory website. I mean, the basic theory behind circuit bending is always use battery-operated toys or whatever you're working on at the time, and avoid the capacitor, the flash capacitor on any camera you're working on as well if it's a standalone camera. So anyway, so I started rewiring my own cameras. So in the end, they look like this. So, okay. So I made this video with one of my cameras. I'll just cue that up on the old video player there. You never want to touch a flash capacitor on a camera because it hurts. So this is a video actually made with actually that webcam. It'll actually queue up. No, that's what that looks like. So obviously I've manipulated it somewhat there. And you get these really gorgeous sliding lines and echoes and things like that in it, depending on where you put the potentiometers, but I'll talk about that in a second. You can see there where it drifts across there. That's just me adjusting the potentiometers as I go along. Okay. So that's that. That's just one of the cameras that I modified. I've actually got a good few. No, I can answer that now, Dina. Yes, you get a fully valid stream with a circuit bent camera. Yeah, you do. Depends on how you, I mean, yeah, I could probably answer that better through the rest of the talk, but if you want to ask me later, that's fine. It's fully valid. That's what I use in a lot of my work. So this is the modified camera. So this is the same camera again. So the theory and practice of what I'm doing is deceptively simple, and it's largely a process of trial and error. And I suppose in some ways it parallels what I'm doing with files through hex editing and data moshing, and another method which I'll discuss further on. But in some ways it's more satisfying as I can achieve effects and textures which are uniquely mine. So how do we do this? First, find a camera, as you can see, preferably a cheap old webcam. Now, I prefer cheaper older webcams because the newer ones are a lot harder to bend just because of design changes. They change from large CCD. So the thing in the middle of that picture there is the CCD, and there's solder points that you can actually solder onto. So newer ones basically have the CCD and a few other components actually in a discrete package. So it's actually harder to get to those points. So basically, yes, where was it? Yeah, get an old webcam, open it up, remove the lens. So you can see I've got the lens off there to expose the image center. Now, while I'm doing this, I usually attach the webcam to the PC, and I open up whatever webcam viewing software I'm using, then take short lengths of wire and short circuit points between points on the CCD. And then while I'm doing that, I'm noting and marking where the best bends are and which to avoid, because quite often what will happen is if you hit a wrong point, the camera will basically shut down and disconnect. And sometimes the software or even the computer will crash and you have to restart everything, but it's worth it. So, oh, it doesn't damage the computer when it does that, just to emphasize. So as you can see in this previous slide, I then solder onto these points. That's all the wires coming off the CCD. And then I attach potentiometers, which are just slide controls and volume controls like that. So I can control how much of a bend I want to get. Eventually, I'll mount them so they are more usable. So the camera in the end looks a bit, so that's just the trial and error. So yeah, as I say, open the camera up, remove the lens to expose the CCD, and so on. And the camera eventually looks like this. So that's the camera mounted on kind of like a little cheapy tripod. And you can actually see in the background there's potentiometers and switches and things like that. So then I just point the camera at a source and adjust the potentiometers until I get what I like. And a lot of the time this means pointing at a CRT monitor, which is playing back a video or TV, or when I'm using an operating system which has flaws in it, which I'm going to talk about later. I never really just use one process, as I've said before. So this is, I'm going to show you a video now, which is done with a different camera. So this is called Go-Go Preaching. And this also has sound on it as well, which I made, I think. Never be quite sure. So this is Go-Go Preaching World's End. Oh, there we go. There is sound on that. If you want to put up your volume, you can. I'm going to leave mine off. So this is made with a different camera, which reacts differently to circuit bending to the previous one. So one of the things about circuit bending is that you get a different look and feel. Also, actually, I'll say that once I've paused that. Yeah. Right, so I'll stop sharing. The link's actually in the shared now. Yeah. Yes, I have done, yeah. I have. I've got ones that are literally feature length doing that, yeah. So, as I was going to say, but I wanted you to hear the sound as well. So that was made with a different camera to the video I showed you to begin with. Now, one of the things about circuit bending is that you get a different look and feel depending on the camera and even the lens that you're using with the camera. So that leads to some unique images which you just can't get with, say, hex editing or data moshing alone. So regardless of which codec you use. So it's a good way of getting something that looks different. When everyone uses the same techniques and codecs and methods, things can look a little samey, especially when you think about things like pixel sorting and stuff like that, or the whole I think it's back in 2016 when GAC went mad for, what's it, Delaunay triangulation. So, though I could equally say the same about painting a sculpture, it's how you use the methods that matters. But circuit bent cameras become uniquely yours. So, the sound on that, as I was saying, is also made by me, and that's with a circuit bent Casiotone PT1. It's a tiny little toy kind of portable keyboard, and a DIY ring modulator that I made. And that was all put together in Audacity, the sound for that. I'm always playing around with ideas, and I was just interested to see if that would work. I have an uneasy relationship with sound, and I prefer usually to salvage the sound from the brokenness of the file, the artifacts that hex editing can create. And again, I'll talk about that more tomorrow. Or we could run these cameras through processing as a source, and it will work. So, as I keep saying, don't use one technique. So I'll often use a combination of circuit bending, hex editing, data moshing, and a newer, and at the moment primary area of research for me, misinterpretation through operating system flaws in video playback. Now, next slide. So I've also experimented with bending graphics cards, especially older ones. I've had mixed results from that. I've experimented with using older PCI and AGP graphics cards, and there's one in particular called an Avance Logic PCI card. It's actually one of the best, and also early ATI AGP cards, though this approach is riskier and can lead to the computer shutting down and causing damage to the card itself. I haven't actually damaged a card yet. I can see how it could happen. So when I'm actually circuit bending on a graphics card, I avoid the graphics chip and concentrate on the RAM chips and short circuit those, similar in the way to I'd short circuit on the CCD of a camera. So I'm just basically bridging points on the RAM chips. And then I try and capture the output with my VGA to composite adapter and my trusty capture card. Now I'll just cue up the video of that actually happening. Yeah, this one. This is quite a long one, but I'll just play maybe a minute or so of it. Again, this is a live capture. So like the previous video, that was actually captured in real time. So this is just me basically short-circuiting points on the graphics card. So this is a damage file I've already made beforehand. And let's see if yeah. So there is the first point where I've actually touched the RAM chips, and you can see the squaring there. And different points on different RAM chips, you'll get various effects. Obviously, because this is a very kind of intense saturated color video, you'll get more intense kind of blocks here and there. And also, if we work in black and white as well. I mean, with these, it is a very crude approach in that I don't physically solder onto the cards themselves. I'm literally there with I have some test probes with on my multimeter. I'm just punching between points basically. It's probably safer because remember, a computer's running. I mean, even though the internal voltages aren't high, I'm probably hit the wrong spot accidentally, either blow the computer or anyway. This is a black and white film, so I think this is an ATI card that I'm using here. The other one, or is this the Avance? No, yeah, this is the ATI card. So you can see I'm just getting some odd reds there. And then the video is actually breaking up a little bit. I wasn't overly pleased with this one, but there's some possibilities there. And it seems to be common to a lot of them that you get this squaring effect, but that's probably just because of the points that I'm hitting on the RAM cards. Sorry, on the RAM chips. Oh, this green color. And if we go, where is it? Yeah. So that's, as you can see, that's breaking up quite heavily there now, echoing some of the image here and there. So as well as trying to circuit bend graphics cards, just stop that there now. I also look for damaged video cards because they're quite interesting as well. You can get some interesting effects off them. Actually, a good reference for damaged video cards is the work of a guy called John Bumstead. And he just does brilliant work with old Apple Mac computers, laptops mainly, because he has his main job is recycling them, but he also does some amazing work with polarizing filters on the screens and all the different kind of things that happen with MacBooks as they basically self-destruct, which they all do in the end. It's a very, very sad and unhappy life being a MacBook. So this is a video of this one damaged card that I actually use quite a lot because it's quite stable. And it's actually the problem with a lot of the graphics cards that you get which are damaged is it's very hard to actually boot an operating system with them and kind of get to prompts where you can set stuff up. Yeah. So this is the damaged Avance Logic I'm playing now. And this is my favorite card. So you get this wonderful drifting across constantly. And that's consistent, basically. That'll work with basically any operating system that I've used it on, Linux or Windows even. But it is, I mean, the card itself is as old as the hills. I think it's from about 96 or 97. But always this juddering kind of sideways pixel sorting kind of effect. I actually use this in one of my videos. There's some beautiful bits and pieces. The face here, especially the man's face, is beautiful. It's because of the light and dark and then just the ghosting effects that you get with it. So, as I say, sometimes damaged graphics cards can be very hard to use because I'd be running like these with a live Linux distribution, so running off the CD. Trying to boot it can be quite hard. So the next slide. So my main kind of area of concern these days is I collect old computers, and partly because I like them, I like repairing them, but also financially, I'm sure we're all artists here, so as you all know, there's not a lot of money to be made out of art. And I can't afford the latest 64 core, 128 thread Ryzen. I'd love to, but I can't. So most of my work is made on low end machines. And to see how low end I could go and still make glitch art, I happened upon this version of Puppy Linux called Legacy OS. And it works reasonably well on an old Pentium 3 with a very small amount of RAM and a modest graphics card. And I can do some basic FM stuff, hex editing and video playback, but I also use this distro to test out machines or check out hard drives or even whether the graphics card is working. And the advantage with this and a lot of Linux distros is you can just boot them from a live CD or even these days a USB stick. And you don't have to install them. So one day I was testing out a computer and it had this one specific AGP graphics card in it, a Radeon HD 3650. And one of my tests when I'm running through a machine is to check what the video playback is like. Is it fluid, choppy? Is it worthwhile actually using this machine? And I was playing back a video in a video player I hadn't even used before, which is called Quick Play. Something really strange happened. I can't remember what the original video was like. It's probably just me walking around the farmyard where I used to live. But it ended up looking like this. I just have to cue the video up. You can probably hear Marley in the background complaining to me that he wants to go up. Just a minute, Marley. I'll let you up in a minute. Yes, I can hear you. You're very loud. So this video is basically the result of the card. And yes, Marley, all right. Okay. When you start barking, could you grab Marley for me, please? Thank you. Just a bit of crowd control with the dogs there. So as I was saying, this just happened, and I just wow, that's unusual to say the least. And the thing is, it kept on happening. He's going to go underneath the, well, I'll just leave him there until he comes out. So if I played back a video on this machine with this graphics card, it just kept on happening, but it has to be a Radeon. Right, yeah, so I've got one more video to play for that. Yeah, we're still online. So this is actually one of the key videos that I to me, that came out of that. Control V. I think that's Marley in with you now, Antonia. So as I said, this is probably one of the key videos that I made then, to me anyway. And this was actually, I think, a video of me walking around in like a forest or something on the farm where I was living at the time. And I made it. Yes, yeah. And it just these incredible textures and colors and blockies, blocked of things. So I tried different graphics card, but the same operating in the same video and the same video player, but it has to be this type of graphics card. And only some files would actually play. So mainly MPEGs, MP4, Xvid, and then there's other stranger file formats like Magic YUV, and also ZMBV is beautiful in this. So these are the key points. It has to be a Radeon. You have to run Legacy OS in live mode from CD, and it has to be an IDE CD-ROM, not SATA, because Legacy OS doesn't pick up SATA drives. And the graphics card must be an AGP Radeon HD 3650, or, as I've later found out, a PCIe Radeon X300 SE or HD 5000 series, or the Radeon 7750 series. So it seems to be a common fault with the later Radeon drivers with Linux. So with Legacy OS as well, there's this function where you can actually choose the display driver, or the display manager, I should say. So you've got two choices, either Xorg or Xvisa. Now, Xorg is the better one, but as I later discovered, you can actually use Xvisa with any graphics card and achieve the same effects that I was getting with the Radeon card. So on setting up Puppy Legacy OS at the Xorg wizard phase, you can also choose the color depth. So you get a choice of either 16 or 24 bits plus the resolution you want to run your monitor at. And that gives an even more interesting range of results. So I'll just show you a video of this running in 16-bit. So this is 16-bit. Okay. So this is a film I was working on from archive called The Hitcher. So as you can see, there's less colors, but it's more defined. Now, when I'm actually looking at this on the monitor, before I capture it with the capture card, there's a lot more detail and a lot more clarity in it. And one of the things I really have to do when I can afford it is get a decent capture card, because this is just not doing justice to what I actually see being created. So now the output is obviously dependent on the input. So choice of codec matters for this instance. For instance, this is the same operating system, the same graphics card, but it's trying to play a file encoded to H.264. Yeah, I could rescan it, or it's H.264 and an M4V wrapper, which for some reason it always has a problem playing, but even the faulty playback is kind of interesting. So this is the same operating system with the same setup as I said in, this is 24-bit, but it's trying to read file as I've said. So you can see if it comes up. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. So you can see it's attempting to actually read the file, but it can't read it completely. So it's leaving the bits it can't read. Then you get these wonderful kind of isolated bits of color there, which I kind of like. There's kind of a beautiful randomness to that. Minimal glitch. So where were we going with this? So there's an important caveat in a lot of what I'm saying, in that many of the faults that I'm going to be describing in a moment, and some of the ones with Legacy OS, don't actually work if you install the operating system to a physical hard drive, especially those found in Linux Mint Bear 2.1, which I'm going to be talking about in a bit. And there's also a specific one with Legacy OS 4 Mini, which is a newer version of Legacy OS 2017, which doesn't work at all if you install it. So you have to basically run everything off a live CD. So let's just go to the next slide. Okay, so I've got a few basic kind of guides that I work by. So older operating systems can be exploited, especially those based on older Linux kernels. So I kind of worked it out that it has to be 2.632 and lower. And they generally have incomplete or incorrect support for certain video cards, or later video cards than the distro was made, and or incomplete support for newer codecs such as H.264 and CAVs. Now you can exploit this, especially if we have a supply of older motherboards and a basic knowledge of how a computer can be built, and a supply of older video cards to test. And this will often give you surprising and unique faults. Certain faults are specific to certain cards and specific operating systems, and even older versions of players like VLC and GNOME M Player. VLC, especially in the older versions, is prone to lots of errors in playback. So the next fault I'm going to show you, I discovered this fault after discovering a similar fault in another version of Legacy OS called Legacy OS 4 Mini, which I've discussed elsewhere, but essentially entails feeding a custom file to a video player which then corrupts the Xorg configuration, which is the display manager in Linux. And then all the videos played afterwards are corrupted and will look like this. I'll just queue up the next video. All right. Now, this is a process I call X11 poisoning. Now, I've actually talked and written about this before, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but all the details are on my blog, so if you did want to research it a bit more, but it ends up looking like this anyway. So having fed the custom file to the display manager, we get things like this. These crispy, kind of strange, oily, odd, wonderful kind of psychedelic patterns. And that's actually, I think that starts off as a black and white film again. And that's actually, me using a camera to actually point at a CRT screen to try and capture it as it is rather than as I do with the capture card, because it's a constant frustration not actually being able to get the detail that I see correctly. That's a very long video, I won't play it all, but you get the idea. So, as I say, to actually get this effect, you have to boot up the operating system live mode, feed it a very specific file, and then that corrupts the display manager, and then you get this. Yeah. So as I said before, most of my recent research into operating systems is to do with a distribution called Linux Mint Bear 2.1. And it's similar but cleaner characteristics to work with than Legacy OS 4 Mini. Again, I don't install it, I just run it off a CD. So having seen how this worked and investigating the reasons as to why Legacy OS 4 Mini, the previous video, does what it does, I discovered this, which is reproducible corruption given any of the 3 video cards already mentioned. And I'll show you what this actually looks like, because this is a lot crisper and a lot clearer and a lot less muddy as well. And sometimes the playback varies. Like, you can start the computer at one day and it'll look one way, and if you start it up another day, it'll look another slightly different way. But you get this, basically, these beautiful blues and clear areas. And I find this very satisfying. And what I do when I'm recording playback from this is I do actually mess around with some of the color values in the capture software, because it can bring out areas that I really like or dampen down other areas that I don't like. So it's kind of tunable as well. This again is taken from one of my pet loves, film noir films. So this is actually a black and white film producing color because of the process it's going through. I find it fascinating that the faces are just blank, and then, or not blank, but they have little detail, and then the hair and the background are all doing what they're doing. So, to say that's on Linux Mint Bear 2.1 from 2006, which is a long time ago. So, one of my things is that an error that I find in an operating system has to be repeatable. So if I want to use something in my work, I have to be able to fire up a computer and find that error and have it working there and then, unless I'm actually looking for a new error. Because I always have in the back of my mind, how will that look if I do that to it? How will it look if I do that to it? So a lot of these findings come from my research over the last year or so into installing and using different distributions of Linux. And having had a hint of what might be possible through finding the first errors in legacy OS 2017, these distributions have so far been the most fertile ground for finding errors in video playback due to a combination of buggy hardware support for the newer ATI cards, and also, more importantly, buggy support for codecs and video playback software. And I've documented this research elsewhere, especially in the talk that I gave at last year's FUBAR and on my blog. I don't want to repeat that too much, as I'm trying to give more of an oversight rather than a detailed walk. But here are two of my favorite errors, both repeatable. And this is also, as I say, something I feel is important. If I find an error, I need to be able to repeat it. So the first error that I'm going to talk about is in an operating system called Ubuntu 6.06. Now, this came out, as the name would imply, in 2006, and Linux Mint Bayer is actually based on Ubuntu 6.06. Now, this is to do with H.264 playback in VLC. And it actually came as a surprise. So when I'm researching video players and operating systems, I've got a set of videos that I know play on most players, and they're kind of like the standards I weigh everything else against. They're all in different formats, so I use them basically for error checking. So I loaded up a H.264 file into VLC and started playback. And then this happened. So this is a film I went on to make later on. It's a full-length interpretation of the original Nosferatu film, the black and white silent film. And yeah, there we go. I'll just put that up. So this is what I call sliding, I suppose, sliding Nosferatu. What's really interesting is the titles as the film starts. So this is actually quite similar to the Avance Logic playback, but okay, here we go. And you can see everything sliding from right to left, and it's just gorgeous. So there's no hex editing or any funny business with the file. The video player is basically trying to play the file and failing, but failing beautifully. And this is, I've not been able to repeat this anywhere else, but in Ubuntu 6.06 and VLC. So it's obviously the way VLC handles H.264 combined with whatever Ubuntu's doing with its multimedia codecs. So also I should say that I went on to use some of this technique in a collaboration with John Cates on his film Ghost Town, A Glitch Western. Now, I worked on special glitch effects for a version of that, which was later shown in Taipei. There's a link actually in the shared notes, though. Which version of VLC? I'd have to look it up. I'd say veteran. I can't say offhand, but I'd have to look it up. And the final thing that I'm going to show you, just go back to the slides now. As I say, that's up on YouTube. It's the full length thing, and it's kind of fun just to flick through and find. There's just some really beautiful moments where everything just melts, just goes across. Really lovely, like there. And that was just a complete surprise. I hadn't expected it. But then that's the fun. So then there's one other error that I'll talk about. So this again was an unexpected one. So this is in Ubuntu 10.04. It's actually common to a couple of other operating systems which are based around Ubuntu or Debian even. So before I discovered using Cheese Webcam Booth and later OBS Studio to use in combination with my capture card, I'd often use Record My Desktop to record the output of the malfunctions that I was seeing with Legacy OS through an application called TV Time, which is just basically a kind of a TV viewer which also plays back composite input. from my capture card. Now, it records in OGV format, which, as far as I know, has been a common standard for open source video on the Linux desktop since at least 2005, 2006. I'm not sure of the exact date. So you'd think there would be an element of backward compatibility because this file has been around for a good while. But as I discovered, newer recordings that I was making with the software record my desktop, they're recorded to OGV. Now, if I go back and play them on older distributions, the OGV file is actually completely misinterpreted, and it turns into this. I'll just cue that up. I call this one just a big hot mess. So this is OGV played back in GNOME M Player. The video playback software is actually quite specific for this one. So just starts there. Okay, there we go. And so this was a video I'd recorded a playback from one computer. It was actually quite readable, but I played it back in Ubuntu 10.04, and it just turned into this. It's like, wow. You get all this wonderful pixelation and blocks and all sorts of oddities. I could look at that for hours. Very geometrical. I suppose, like going back to what we were talking about earlier in the week, abstraction. This is probably as close to abstraction as I'd get, just because the artifacts you get with it, the banding and the squaring and the movement, are closer to abstraction than anything else that I've done. I just enjoy the output. And it can be any OGV file. If I've recorded it on a modern machine, then go and play it back in Ubuntu 10.04, it'll look like this. And again, I've documented this elsewhere on my blog, but I just wanted to show you this one file. Okay. Okay. Now, questions. That's it. Questions. If you'd like to leap in there, Dina. And
Hi.
aha, hi.
So I'm gonna read back, like I was making notes, like side notes, because I didn't want to interrupt you all the time. I had tons of questions.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't think we have like ones in the chat right now, but if anybody has some questions, just let us know. So I have a few questions which are a bit more technical and a few which are maybe one which is ideological somehow. So yeah, let's start with the technical ones. Some you already answered. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask, like, do you think like now you're utilizing like this older hardware and software, and you're somehow conserving these states? Like you have the physical hardware and the software you use from CDs, but maybe like 20 years from now, like there wouldn't be any more bugs or older hardware to exploit? Or you think like the older hardware is sturdy enough to still continue like being usable?
Yeah, I think from experience, I mean, the older hardware is definitely built better. Definitely. One of the good things about lockdown is I've had the time to actually take out all my machines and replace loads of capacitors and things like that, and they're definitely a lot more sturdy. So yeah, you've disappeared off chat there. Are you still there?
Yeah.
That was
I will mute myself just in case of typing motorbikes, cats.
No, I'd prefer to hear the sound because then I know it hasn't cut out here.
Okay.
As for whether there's newer bugs in newer operating systems, I haven't. and I have tried. It seems they're ironing out a lot of the problems had with the kernels. So yeah, it seems that it is kind of that era equipment from kind of so the late 90s to the kind of 2000, say, around then, and operating systems within that era as well. So I suppose it's archaeology in a way, digging out these old things and seeing if they work and then seeing what you can do with them. And I enjoy doing that. I mean, I didn't expect to find these. I wasn't looking for them. I wanted to take an old computer work, and I just found this mistake. I talked about it, as I said, as you know, at Fubar. That was, that's I love it. Finding things that nobody else thought about before. I just found that unusual that nobody else had. Well, not to my knowledge. I'm always prepared to be corrected on that. So yeah, I'd look at it. Digital archaeology, shall we?
I know just of a few projects, because mostly like artists want to present something that will work, something that is like super high resolution or 4K. So I feel like these types of projects, which are a bit also introspective, they're like critical on a hardware, like infrastructure level, are less and less. But there are some we should exchange notes on this.
Yeah. Well, I
And
mean, sorry, go on. I keep interrupting. Go on.
oh no, it's okay. You can continue.
No, you had an extra bit to add, I think.
Yeah, I had an extension basically, which is the question of ecology. Like, as we discussed open source a lot, and this is like a type of a special digital and like information exchange digital ecosystem. I yeah, I like to use this term, like digital ecosystem. Like, is ecology like real life, like away from keyboard ecology of the industry, like creating new disposable and really short lifespan tech equipment? Is this like also an important part of your decision, especially in regards to the consumer or prosumer aspect of the state of contemporary art?
Yeah, definitely. I think the consumerism, prosumerism, you took for and as soon as you saying, well, something must for produce content to make the way it's because they need the new stuff, they need the fast stuff, and it's not actually visually any more interesting. It's just higher resolution. So I suppose it creates that cycle of wanting to replace or upgrade all the rest of it, upgrade culture. And it is consumerism, which leads to a terrible waste. And even down to, I suppose, the technical way that the computers are built in the manufacturers. The change from lead-based solder, which at first would seem to be more ecological. They changed the formulation for health and safety to make sure that when stuff went into lead, it didn't read out so many poisons. But the flip side of that is that the newer solder that they use in motherboards is that more, and the more heat, the more components take, the more likely solder to actually or so from 2017 with all the books. Well, it wasn't fine to add.
Hey, sorry, Ian, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm not sure if everybody else, but for everybody else, but for me, your sound is clipping a lot. So I don't know, maybe something with the microphone.
Yeah. Is that maybe because I'm speaking too quickly and moving around?
No.
A connection clipping out.
Yeah. Is anybody else having the clipping? Yes. Ah, okay.
Yeah,
So maybe we just
yeah,
take like 30 seconds, just a small break, and figure out
yeah,
if we can
yeah,
fix this.
yeah. Okay. Maybe we
Because,
can switch to task fine as well. Yeah, that's
yeah.
also okay. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Like, I can understand that your answer is like super interesting, but I get like
Yeah,
30% of it,
yeah,
and then I'm
yeah,
trying to like figure out what you said. Um,
yeah. Right. I'm looking at my keyboard now. Yes, connection.
now
Okay.
now it's
So
good. So maybe we
okay.
can just continue, and then maybe we just like start typing if it doesn't work.
Yeah. So I was talking about the change in the formulation of solder. Um, So that was about 2007, 2008. And there's a whole generation of MacBooks from then where it's also a problem with NVIDIA as well, but the graphics cards started to come away from the motherboards. And that's because even though the solder was more ecological in the long term, because it breaks more easily under heat, the machines have to be thrown away more often because they break more often. It's
Mhm.
actually harder to repair them. So it's easier to work on a motherboard pre the introduction of this solder than the newer ones. So I suppose what I do is anti-obsolescence as well, because all the machines I have work. They're old, but they work, and they're kind of interesting. Yeah. So it is kind of a digital archaeology, but also digital ecology as well,
Yeah, yeah.
if that answers that.
Yeah, definitely. I think
Yeah.
it's like something that we should at least be all of us be aware that exists
Mm.
as an option, and
Yeah.
I feel like an arts organizer or curator or an institution should be open to this, like not
Mm.
exclusively utilizing consumer hardware to
Or
like
even the
display.
prosumer stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a question which also relates to this subject, like the next one, is would you consider this computer, your old machine that you have with the legacy operating system and your
Hmm.
files, do you consider that your work, or is the work the digital setup only, like
Um,
the information? And if you would to sell your art, would you sell the computer or would you sell the screen cap of the video?
I would rather tell people the equipment that I'm using and the computers that I've observed and am able to recreate those effects on and give that information away for free. Um, I've never actually thought of selling my work as it is. I just put it up as Creative Commons. And that's actually a political decision as well as an ideological one. And that's a thought out position coming from being a painter and knowing all the politics and the issues around money and investment painting and things like that. I would rather put work out there, give people the information and empower them how to make their own work than contribute to a system which allows a few kind of art stars to exist, as I've, talked about before. Because that to me seems more ecological and more human, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Than
nice answer.
yeah, if that makes sense. I mean, my basic philosophy is when I'm making art now is don't make anything that can be used or sold by the 1%. And if you make a unique object or sell an object, that instantly attaches some kind of market value to it. If you give it away, it stops having that market value. And that's the position I'm in now, I suppose. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
So
So we have a question
yeah.
now. Thanks for this like super complex answer.
It's not. Oh, that
Yeah,
was a
I
really,
mean it's
really
simple
simple.
in practice, and then
Yeah.
like people would say, "But how I'm gonna make my living?" But there are like different options, different systems you can set
Yeah.
up in
Yeah.
place for
Yeah.
artists to
Yeah.
still be able to make a living without
Mm,
having to reproduce or produce
yeah.
these like objects that only finish up in the art system,
But I mean,
like you mentioned.
you can look at it a different way. I support myself largely through part-time work, and obviously because Europe is decent in that it has a sensible social security system. So I
Mm,
work and I get paid for that, and the taxpayer gets to take their cut, which is fair enough. But there's also where am I going with this? There's the social aspect of it. I mean,
mm,
how do you support yourself as an artist? To me, the better question would be, how do you make your society better?
mm,
If you think in terms of being an artist who has to make a living through money, you cease to ask the question, well, what is it that an artist is, and what should an artist do? And to me, art, culture, in whatever form it is the highest good that society can ascribe to. It makes us all richer,
mm.
socially and intellectually and emotionally. And so I'd rather think, well, what can I give back to the society which has supported me? Again, it relates to open source software. Open source software is given to me for free, basically, to use, and I get a lot out of it. So how can I, in good conscience, then use that software as an artist and not give back? Because I suppose in one way, it's my way of giving back, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
This,
I'd rather give to the common good than give to just my own selfish needs, if you see what I mean.
yeah, yeah.
So,
I feel like
yeah.
that kind of stance is really activist in practice, even though it's
Yeah.
not really understandable, but
Yeah.
by the whole art system at this point. I mean, there are some radical initiatives like conceptual and political theory initiatives towards like free food for all or a
Mm.
free universal income, and why
Mm.
not in the future we should have like all the art should be free for everybody
Yeah.
to enjoy it and
Yeah.
to utilize it and
Yeah.
also to produce by
Yeah.
the art.
Yeah.
So I think we're moving into a different type of understanding the
Yeah.
arts and
Yeah.
culture, which will
Yeah.
not be, which will not necessarily mean that the artists have to like never receive any
Mm.
uh, payment for any work, but you would not have to sell your objects maybe in
Yeah.
the future.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I could like just discuss this for hours, so I'm gonna stop myself here. And we have a question from the chat, and that is, I'll quote unquote, to ask something in a completely different direction. Have you ever tried all this in virtual machines? This way it can be used on newer machines.
There is that argument, and I've used Ubuntu 6.06 in a virtual machine and been able to reproduce the sliding effect. That's doable, but a lot of the flaws that I see are hardware. They have to be run on hardware because it's the flaws in the hardware which create it. A virtual machine would run the software, but you won't be able to get the faults from it. There's not the variety or the texture or the difference, I suppose. I believe in the uniqueness of each machine in itself. There's no identical machines ever been built.
Cool.
Is there going
I
to be
think
an extra
Vedran
bit of that?
is one
Yeah,
day.
yeah. Yeah, the machines could be emulated, yeah, but I mean, that's a level of complexity that I don't have the space for. Yeah, I'm sure it will. You could probably model in the same way that you have circuit modeling software now. If you could model, that would actually be an interesting concept. If you could model a computer in software and then kind of glitch that software hardware, and then run the operating system. That would be really interesting. Yeah, I could see that happening. That's a whole different area of approach, I think. Yeah, yeah, I know where you go with that. But at the moment, I like machines. I like working with them because they're. I suppose I'm a bit of an animist. I believe they have some kind of. I talk to them when I'm working on them, and they have moods and things like that. So there's kind of a Japanese feeling to it. Yeah. So yes, but I just like working on machines. They're nice. Yeah. That's kind of the answer. The dust. Yeah. The dust. Love, lovely.
Cool. So, if we don't have any more questions, maybe we wrap it for the day.
Yeah. Okay.
Nobody's typing at the moment. Okay, save your questions for tomorrow if you have them. Yeah, thank you all
Well,
for being
thank
here, and thank you,
yeah.
Ian.
And I really enjoyed that conversation. That was excellent. Yeah, more of that. Right. Well, thank you everybody for turning up again. See you tomorrow if you want to hear my last talk. On Sunday, just to get a heads up, I'm doing a full length kind of live thing. So more information about that. Okay. Right. Bye.